morning, this is Pastor Rey again. I trust that you are staying home, staying safe, and staying connected. Today, our meditation is about going past forward. We've heard it said, we venture into the future guided by the past. And by the past, we mean the sacred scriptures. The picture presented to us by our text today is 2,000 years removed from the modern world we live in. How much of the old picture can we appropriate for ourselves as we live and do ministry in the present, venturing into the future? First, let's consider the past. The early church was born in a Greco-Roman world that did not want to recognize it. In its infancy, the church was considered an illegal religion, one that is not recognized as one within the empire. Its practices and doctrines went against the teaching of the existing religion in Rome. But there is something going on for the members of that early church that kept it going. Their faith in Jesus, the risen Lord, who is coming again and coming again real soon. Jesus was coming to establish an earthly reign where they will participate as rulers with their share of the political power. That's the hope. With such expectation, their love for each other was deep, sincere, intentional, and expressed with a sense of urgency. Shortly after Jesus' ascension, therefore, this early church amazingly formed a closely knit, fast-growing community described in our text this way. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe and the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possession to give everyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Is it possible to create or recreate the kind of first century faith community given our present social environment? So let's briefly consider where we are currently. Today, the church is no longer persecuted. The American society is a pluralistic society, a society where everyone has the right to practice and propagate his or her own religion. Not only are we a pluralistic society, we also now live in a post-Christian society. That means Christianity is no longer the dominant and influential religion that it used to be in the West. Technologically speaking, we live in what is definitely the fastest changing industrial world enhanced by modern technological advances. The internet has made it possible for us to disseminate and search for information worldwide, making globalization possible and worshiping together possible while staying at home. We live in the most powerful and the most affluent country in the world. Our society, however, is highly individualistic. Neighbors 3 or 4 houses away do not necessarily know each other, nor do they have to. Although we acknowledge being interrelated, we are not necessarily interdependent. We are each independent and individualistic. In other words, our world is entirely different from the world of the first century church. So the question remains, is it possible to recreate that society that was modeled by the early church we find in our text today? If not, which is obviously the case, how much of it can we appropriate for ourselves for our time? Before we consider that question, let's look at a few lessons from the past. History tells us that the church did not manage success well. The church eventually took on the image of the dragon that it succeeded in slaying. The lowly Christian church became the Holy Roman Empire with a twin head called an emperor and a pope. The church refused to take criticism of any kind, crushing everything and everyone that dared. Those who are critical of the church and its dogma were branded heretics and were burnt at stake. The Inquisition extracted forced confessions. Galileo was put in the dungeon. The result was the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, which led to the Reformation movement. The 16th century Reformation did not come from outside the church's walls. The reformers belonged to its ranks of priests and monks, who criticized basically the wealth and lifestyle of its own clergy. The church started to own lands and clergy became landlords. Clergies indulged in luxury and immoral practices while the larger majority of their parishes wallowed in poverty. In the final analysis, therefore, the lesson from history is that it is the weakness of the human fiber that ultimately brought the church down, not its creed, but its greed. I have spoken often that God uses human agencies. As a matter of fact, that is where I started this series of messages. Faith in humanity and faith in God. But history also tells us that humans need to rid itself of its proclivity to be attached to possessions if it is to replicate the community of the early church. Jesus issued his followers more warnings about attachment to wealth than he did about the danger of hell. It is not wrong to possess wealth. It goes wrong only when wealth possesses the owner. So, given the materialistic world we find ourselves in, is it possible to establish a faith community similar to that of the early church? What kind of divine intervention do we need to press the reset button? While we still gather together in prayer and fellowship and worship, and hopefully we can go back to gathering together physically in the church and soon, there are those that we cannot recover anymore. Miracles of healing performed by the disciples. We'll have to admit we no longer have that gift. That gift is now performed by hospitals and medical practitioners. Clearly, we cannot put all our individual resources under one bank account. Although members of the communion Israel still do that, I do not think it is possible given our setting. We cannot have everything in common. We cannot meet every day as the members of the early church did. But there is one thing that we can still certainly recover and appropriate for ourselves, and that is looking after each other's need as the early church did. I am proud to say that our church council 2 months ago passed an action saying, our church is willing to extend help to those who will be affected by the lockdown. True to its word, I can say that our church has responded generously to those who made their need known. Looking back then, and given our current situation, we discovered that despite or in spite human progress in economics and politics, ultimately it's still only in God we can trust. Our current situation is also telling us that although we cannot appropriate everything that the members of the early church did, we can still carry on with the way they loved and cared deeply for one another. For indeed, love is ageless. Loving each other may not be able to immediately affect the larger community we are in, given our size and limitation. But just as the church started small in a world that is less tolerant than the world we live in, and then expanded and continued expanding until, quote unquote, it became the largest tree in the garden, so can our efforts be. It was God who added to their number daily those who are being saved. That meant the church became attractive to both seekers and those who were in need. We can still regather in worship, fellowship, and breaking bread together. When we add to that the deep and sincere love and care one for another, we will be attractive to others and hope God will likewise bless our efforts with success. Amen.